The Grand Palace loomed high in the alien city, its towers stretching far into the sky, crafted from materials that seemed to shimmer and change color with every passing moment. The streets below were bustling with life, filled with creatures from all across the galaxy. They walked in perfect order, every individual fulfilling their role in the grand structure of the empire. But in the heart of this sophisticated city, there was a tension brewing, a conflict between power and pride that would set the stage for a remarkable change. Max, a battle-hardened human soldier, stood at the entrance of the palace. His mind was focused, his posture rigid, and though he looked calm on the outside, his heart raced with anticipation. A human wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't his world. But here he was, assigned by the Galactic Council to protect Princess Zara, a ruler as fierce as she was beautiful. Zara was a towering figure, her alien form exuding strength and authority. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, her eyes glowing a fierce red, and her sharp features gave her an air of unapproachable power. She had heard of humans, of course, primitive creatures with little more than brute strength and stubborn will. But humans were not the focus of the Galactic Empire. Her people, the Eurasians, were the pinnacle of civilization, and they had little patience for anything beneath them. Max knew what this assignment meant. It wasn't an honor, it was a test. The council believed the princess needed a human soldier for protection, but Zara would see it as nothing more than a waste of resources. He had been given the task not because of his abilities, but because the council thought humans were expendable. It was a fact Max had accepted long ago. In the eyes of most aliens, humans were nothing but tools, tools that could be thrown away at any moment. As Max entered the throne room, Zara's piercing gaze immediately fixed on him. Her royal robes, adorned with jewels and symbols of power, shimmered as she stood in front of her massive throne. Without a word, she commanded him to approach. Max did so, keeping his eyes steady and his steps purposeful. He had been trained for this moment, to maintain composure in front of the most dangerous of foes. But what Zara didn't expect was what came next. She looked at him with disdain, the words she had prepared flowing easily from her lips. "Kneel before me, human," she ordered. Her voice was like a command from the heavens, cold, sharp, and unforgiving. She had seen countless beings bow to her authority, and she expected no less from Max. Most would have hesitated, most would have protested, but Max didn't. Without a flicker of doubt, he lowered himself to one knee. The sound of his boots hitting the floor echoed in the vast, cold room. His face remained expressionless, his eyes locked onto hers. He had done exactly as she ordered. Zara blinked in surprise. She had expected resistance, defiance, perhaps even anger. But instead, this human, this inferior creature, had obeyed without hesitation. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she wondered if she had misjudged him. Was he mocking her? Or was he simply weak? The idea of a human being weak didn't sit well with her, but she couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity. Max stayed on his knee, waiting. In his mind, the wheels were turning. His calmness was part of the plan, a plan that was taking shape slowly but surely. He wasn't just obeying her, he was gathering information, learning her patterns, understanding her weaknesses. Humans might be primitive, but they were adaptable, resourceful. They had survived on their own, in harsh conditions, against all odds. And Max was no different. He was not just a soldier, he was a strategist, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Zara's voice broke the silence. "Stand, human," she said, the words barely concealing her annoyance. She had never been one to tolerate weakness or submission, especially from those she considered beneath her. Yet in the back of her mind, something shifted. Was it possible? Could this human be different? Max rose to his feet, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving her gaze. He wasn't afraid. He had expected this moment, had planned for it. And now, as Zara looked at him, studying him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, Max could sense the first crack in her armor. It was a small thing, but in the high-stakes world of royal politics, it was everything. "Why did you kneel?" Zara asked, her voice softer now, though still commanding. "You, a human, of all people, lowering yourself before me." Max didn't flinch. "Because I wanted to," he said simply, his words calm but carrying. Zara furrowed her brow. She had expected some form of explanation, but Max's response only deepened her confusion. This human, this soldier, wasn't like the others. She had assumed that humans were driven only by pride and emotion, but he didn't seem to care for such things. His actions were calculated, his mind sharp, and for the first time in a long while, Zara found herself intrigued. "You are different," Zara murmured, more to herself than to him. Max, however, heard the words. He smiled inwardly, but kept his expression neutral. This was just the beginning. Zara turned away, gesturing for Max to follow. She would test him further. She would learn what made this human tick, why he was so calm, so unbothered by her commands. But as they moved through the palace, Max couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a test. It was the start of something far greater. And so, the tension between them grew, slowly but surely, as the strange alliance between the human soldier and the alien princess began to take root. The next few days would reveal more than either of them could have imagined. But for now, Max kept his eyes focused on the one thing that mattered most, the future. And in this future, he knew exactly where he would stand. Max could feel the weight of Zara's eyes on him. After that first encounter, everything seemed different. The princess had been intrigued, though she wouldn't admit it. She treated him with cold formality, but her actions had changed. The way she spoke to him now wasn't just condescending. There was a hint of curiosity in her voice that Max couldn't ignore. She had underestimated him, thinking he was just another obedient human, easily crushed under the weight of her power. But Max was far from ordinary, and he intended to prove it. Over the following days, Zara began testing him. She would assign him impossible tasks, expecting him to fail. But Max had anticipated this. His mind worked differently than others. While the Eurasian Empire prided itself on its advanced technology and unbeatable tactics, Max relied on something else: human ingenuity. It was this very quality that had helped humanity survive against odds far worse than anything the aliens could throw at him. The first test came early in the morning. Zara ordered Max to take part in a training exercise with some of her elite guards. These were warriors who had been trained for years, their combat skills honed to perfection. Zara stood at a distance, observing the scene with a smirk on her face. She was sure Max wouldn't last long. To her, humans were primitive, incapable of matching her warriors' advanced skills. Max was up against 3 of Zara's best fighters. They were armed with energy blades, a weapon that was as lethal as it was beautiful. The blades glowed with a soft blue light, their edges so sharp they could slice through metal like butter. The 3 guards moved quickly, circling him with a predator's grace. Max could hear their footsteps, the slight hum of the energy blades in the air. He knew he couldn't outfight them head-on. They were faster, stronger, and far more skilled. But Max didn't need to beat them in a straight-up fight. Instead, he used his surroundings. The Eurasian palace, while grand, had its own weaknesses. The floors were polished smooth, and there were plenty of pillars for cover. Max moved quickly, using the columns to shield himself from their attacks. The guards, not expecting such evasive tactics, were momentarily thrown off. Max used their hesitation to his advantage, dodging one strike after another. At one point, he managed to grab one of their weapons, turning it against them. With a swift move, Max knocked one of the guards to the ground, disarming another in the process. The 3rd fighter wasn't far behind, but Max used a quick series of punches and low kicks to send him stumbling backward. In the end, Max stood over his opponents, breathing heavily but victorious. Zara's eyes widened in disbelief as she watched the scene unfold. Her warriors were the best of the best, and yet A human had defeated them with nothing but quick thinking and adaptability. She had expected him to fail miserably. But instead, Max had shown her that humans weren't as weak as she had been led to believe. Despite herself, Zara was impressed. She had seen humans before, seen them fight, but never like this. This was not the kind of warrior she had anticipated. But the pride of her people ran deep, and she wasn't about to let Max see that he had earned her respect. She stood tall and motioned for the guards to rise. "Get up," she commanded. Her voice was stern, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Max noticed it. The second test came a day later. Zara took Max on a tour of one of the Empire's most secure research facilities. It was here that her scientists worked on weapons of mass destruction, things that could obliterate entire fleets with a single strike. She wanted to see how Max handled the high-tech environment. The facility was filled with robots, artificial intelligence, and powerful energy weapons. Everything screamed sophistication. Everything was far beyond human capabilities. The moment they entered, Zara ordered the facility's security system to lock down. The robotic sentries, armed with blasters and retractable blades, activated. They were programmed to neutralize any intruder, and Max was now their target. The AI running the facility took control, its cold voice filling the air. "Intruder detected. Initiating lockdown. Eliminate all threats." Max wasn't fazed. He'd been in dangerous situations before, facing enemies far more advanced than any robot or AI. While Zara stood back, observing with a mix of interest and amusement, Max quickly scanned his surroundings. The robots were fast, but they had predictable patterns. He was used to the unexpected, always looking for weak spots in even the most advanced tech. He found it. In the corner of the room, there was a central control panel that could override the facility's security system. Max moved quickly, dodging the blasts from the sentries, using the cover of the lab's pillars and crates. With a combination of acrobatics and quick thinking, he managed to reach the panel, bypassing the robot sentries in the process. In just a few moments, he had disabled the lockdown, sending the robots into a temporary shutdown. Zara was again left in stunned silence. She had never seen someone take on her empire's technology with such confidence. Her empire had been built on its technological superiority, and yet this human had disrupted it with ease. She began to see that Max was not the weakling she had assumed. He was a threat, an unknown variable that couldn't be easily controlled. Despite her growing respect for him, Zara refused to acknowledge it. Instead, she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. She needed to understand why Max was so different from the humans she had known. And perhaps more importantly, she needed to understand why she was starting to feel something unfamiliar in his presence. Max, however, wasn't interested in her curiosity. He had learned everything he needed to know. Zara was still underestimating him, but that was exactly how he wanted it. He was playing a game much bigger than any battle he had fought before. And with every test she threw at him, he got closer to understanding her true nature, and perhaps, in the process, gaining her trust. As the days passed, Max began to see the cracks in Zara's armor. Her arrogance, her coldness, her belief that the Eurasian Empire was invincible, all of it was a facade, and he knew just how to exploit it. The real challenge had only just begun. The days continued to pass, and with each one, the power dynamics between Max and Zara shifted ever so slightly. Max had been in this world long enough to know that appearances could be deceiving. Zara, with her towering presence and regal authority, might have appeared invincible to others, but Max had already begun to notice the cracks beneath her seemingly flawless exterior. She ruled with an iron fist, but deep down, there was something fragile about her control, something that made her vulnerable. Zara, for all her power and grandeur, was not accustomed to being challenged. The Eurasian Empire had been at the top for centuries, and her people's superiority was unquestioned. She was the princess, the daughter of the mighty emperor, raised to believe that she was destined to rule the universe. But Max, the human soldier, was a constant reminder that not all power came from strength, technology, or fear. There was something in him, a calm resolve, a cunning mind, that Zara could not ignore. Max had spent days observing her, learning her habits, understanding her ways. She had tested him, forced him into battles of skill and intellect, expecting him to fail. But each time, he had proven her wrong. And with every victory, Max's confidence grew. More importantly, Zara's perception of him began to change. The human soldier she once viewed as a mere tool, a servant, was now someone she couldn't fully comprehend. One evening, Zara summoned Max to her private chambers. It was a rare occasion. She had always kept their interactions formal, businesslike. But tonight, something was different. As Max entered, the atmosphere was charged with an unspoken tension. Zara stood by the window, looking out at the alien skyline. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, casting shadows across her face. She didn't turn when he entered but just. "You have proven yourself human," she said, her voice low and thoughtful. "More than I expected, in fact." Max approached cautiously, but without hesitation. "I do my job, Princess." Zara turned to face him, her violet eyes locking onto his with an intensity that felt like it could pierce through him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was a strange stillness in the room, as if the world outside had faded away. "You're different from the others," Zara continued, her tone softer than usual. "The humans I've encountered have always been brash, reckless, and full of pride. But you," her voice trailed off as if she were searching for the right words, "you are calm, calculating. You don't rush into things like the others, and I can't figure you out." Max's gaze never wavered. He could sense the change in her, the uncertainty that had begun to seep into her words. It was subtle, but it was there. The princess was no longer sure of herself when it came to him. She had underestimated him at every turn, expecting him to fall short, to give up. But here he was, standing before her, having outwitted every obstacle she threw his way. "I'm just a soldier, Princess," Max replied, keeping his voice steady. "I do what I must to survive." Zara's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no anger in them, only curiosity. She had always seen humans as little more than tools, useful for their physical strength, but no more. But Max was different. She didn't know what to make of him, and that uncertainty made her uncomfortable. Max, sensing her unease, took a step closer. He didn't want to appear threatening, but he wanted to remind her that he wasn't just some pawn. He was here to stay, and if she wanted to maintain control, she would have to acknowledge that. "Your empire is powerful, Princess," he said, his voice firm. "But power isn't always enough. It's not enough to just have strength or technology. It's the way you use it, how you choose to wield it." Zara took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving his. For a moment, she considered his words. They were bold, but they weren't wrong. She had always believed that her superiority was unquestionable, that the Eurasian Empire's technology and military prowess could conquer any foe. But Max had shown her that strength alone wasn't enough to win. He had beaten her warriors with ease, bypassed her most advanced security systems, and earned her respect, whether she liked it or not. "I've learned that lesson already," Zara said quietly, "and perhaps you're right. But it's hard to let go of what we've always known." Max's eyes softened. He wasn't here to break her, but to show her that there was more to leadership than just power. The princess had been raised to rule, but in his eyes, she was still learning what it meant to be a true leader. "I'm not asking you to abandon your empire or your way of life," Max said. "But there's a world outside of this palace, a world where strength doesn't always mean survival." Zara paused, then nodded slowly. There was a shift in her expression, something that hadn't been there before, a flicker of understanding. For the first time, Zara felt the weight of her own limitations. She had been raised to believe that the Eurasian Empire's way was the only way. But Max had shown her that even the most powerful empire could be vulnerable. Perhaps the way she had been ruling, with fear and intimidation, wasn't the only path to victory. In that moment, Zara realized that Max wasn't just a soldier. He was a force to be reckoned with. He had shifted the balance of power, not with his strength, but with his mind. And for the first time, Zara found herself considering a new path, one that didn't rely on the old ways of her people, but on something more Max had been right all along. The power wasn't in the weapons, the technology, or the empire. It was in understanding, in using one's mind to navigate the complexities of the universe. And as Zara looked at the human soldier before her, she knew that this shift was inevitable. The power between them had already changed. Max had proven that a human could challenge even the might of the Eurasian Empire. And now, it was up to Zara to decide how far she would go to embrace this new reality. Would she continue to hold on to her old ways, or would she accept the possibility that there was more to leadership than what she had known? As the silence stretched between them, the answer seemed clear. The old world was crumbling, and in its place, a new power was rising. And it all started with one underestimated human soldier. The tension in the palace had been building for days. Zara had never been one to doubt her authority, but Max had begun to change the way she saw the world. She had grown up with the belief that the Eurasian Empire's power was unrivaled, that their technology, their strength, their superiority over the galaxy made them untouchable. But now, standing beside this human soldier, Zara found herself questioning everything she had ever known. Max had always been calm, controlled, and observant. It wasn't like the reckless, impulsive human she had seen before. There was something strategic in his every move, a quiet understanding of the universe that she couldn't quite grasp. He had been right when he said that strength alone wouldn't win the day. For the first time, Zara began to see the cracks in her empire's foundation. Behind closed doors, far from the prying eyes of the palace guards, the whispers of rebellion were starting to spread. Zara's closest allies were growing restless. They saw her interactions with Max as a threat to their authority. To them, the human soldier was nothing more than a distraction, a pawn in a game that could tip the balance of power in ways they didn't understand. Zara had always been a firm believer in her empire's methods, strength through fear, control through force. But Max had proven that there was another way. And the more time they spent together, the more she realized that she couldn't ignore the truth he had shown her. It wasn't just about power. It was about leadership, about finding strength in unity, in understanding, in strategy. Max, too, had begun to see that the fight he had come to this world to win was no longer just about survival. It was about more than that. There was a bigger picture here. As he continued to watch Zara struggle with her role, he saw an opportunity. He had always known that the key to defeating the Eurasian Empire wouldn't lie in brute force alone. It would be about breaking the system from within, showing them that their empire was built on fragile foundations, that fear and control would not hold forever. One night, Max sat in his quarters, thinking about everything that had happened. The palace was quiet, but his mind was racing. Zara had begun to confide in him more, telling him about the troubles she faced within her empire. She spoke of the power struggles, the politics, and the fear that gripped her people. She had confessed that she didn't want to be the ruler her father had been, a ruler who relied on fear to maintain control. Max had listened, offering her his perspective without pushing her. He wasn't here to overthrow her or destroy her empire. He was here to show her another way. But there was a deeper problem. The rebellion was brewing, and it was coming from those closest to her, her trusted generals. The elite soldiers who had sworn allegiance to her were beginning to question her leadership. They were whispering in the shadows, planning to overthrow her, to take control for themselves. It wasn't just a coup. It was a threat to everything Zara had built. And it was about to happen faster than either she or Max could predict. Zara had been warned. Her most loyal advisor, an older woman named Kira, had tried to tell her that the whispers of rebellion were growing louder. But Zara had dismissed her concerns. She didn't believe that her closest allies would turn on her. She thought that the loyalty of her people was unshakable. She was wrong. They were already planning their move. One evening, as Zara walked through the palace corridors, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Her top generals were speaking in hushed tones, discussing their plans to take control of the empire. They believed that the empire needed a stronger leader, one who would rule with more authority, someone who would not be swayed by the human soldier's influence. They saw Zara's growing doubts as weakness. Zara froze in place, hiding behind a pillar as the generals passed by. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of the situation. The rebellion was no longer just a rumor. It was happening. And it was happening within her own ranks. Max had been right all along. The Eurasian Empire was built on fear and control, but it was also a house of cards, and the cards were beginning to fall. The next morning, Zara summoned Max to her chambers. She needed his help, more than ever. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine, that her empire was unbreakable. She had to make a choice, stand with the rebellion and fight for her throne, or listen to the advice of the human soldier who had proven to her that there was a different way. Max entered her chambers cautiously, sensing the weight of the moment. Zara's face was pale, and her eyes were heavy with the burden of the decision she had to make. She looked at him with a mix of desperation and resolve. "I can't do this alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never should have thought I could. Max, the rebellion is already starting. My generals are turning against me, and they'll do anything to seize power." Max stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers. For the first time, Zara saw the human soldier not just as an ally, but as someone who could help her save her empire from itself. "You're not alone," Max said firmly. "You never were. But you have to decide what you really want. Do you want to rule with fear and force, or do you want to fight for something better? The choice is yours." Zara looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of her father's legacy and the fear that had always surrounded her. But in that moment, she knew that Max was right. It wasn't just about keeping her throne. It was about what kind of ruler she wanted to be. It was about the future of her people and the future of her empire. And as the first signs of rebellion took shape around them, Zara knew that the time for change had come. The question was, would she fight for the future, or would she fall into the trap of her past? The air in the palace was thick with tension, a sense of impending doom hanging over every corridor. Zara had made her decision. The rebellion was no longer a distant threat. It was right in front of her. The generals who had once sworn loyalty to her were now her greatest enemies, and they had already begun to make their move. But there was something else, something that had shifted within her since meeting Max. She wasn't going to let fear and control define her any longer. She had a choice, and for the first time in her life, she felt ready to take it. The palace was in chaos. Max had been preparing for this moment, carefully laying the groundwork for a rebellion of his own. But this wasn't about violence or destruction. This was about something more powerful, change. He had been working with Zara, guiding her, helping her understand the true nature of leadership. She had begun to see that strength didn't come from fear. It came from the courage to make hard decisions, from the ability to lead with compassion rather than control. Max's role had always been clear: to protect Zara, to keep her alive long enough for her to see the truth about her empire. But now, he had become more than just a soldier. He had become her partner in a fight for a better future. They both knew that if Zara didn't act quickly, the rebellion would consume everything she had built. Zara had called her most trusted advisors together, including Max, for one last council before the inevitable clash. Her generals were already assembling their forces, ready to march against her. They had no idea that Zara had changed, that she was no longer the same leader who had ruled with an iron fist. She wasn't going to fight. Zara knew the stakes were high. This battle wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about proving that leadership could be something different. It wasn't about controlling through fear and violence. It was about leading with respect, unity, and understanding. But the rebellion's forces were strong. Her generals, once loyal, were now enemies, and they were determined to see her fall. They had no intention of accepting her vision for a peaceful and prosperous future. Max stood beside Zara as they prepared for the final push. They had spent months, even years, building up to this moment, and now there was no turning back. The time for words was over. The time for action had arrived. Zara looked at Max, her gaze full of determination. "We've come this far. Max, I won't back down now. I know what I have to do. No matter what happens, this is the beginning of a new era." Max nodded. He had seen the change in her. The woman who had once ordered his death was now a leader who had learned the true power of compassion. He had helped her see that strength wasn't about ruling through fear. It was about inspiring loyalty, about leading by example. The rebellion had no idea what was about to hit them. The battle began at dawn. Zara's forces, though smaller than the rebel army, were better trained, more disciplined, and united under a common cause. As the two armies clashed, it was clear that Zara's new approach to leadership had given her people a strength they hadn't known before. Her soldiers fought with passion, determination, and a sense of purpose. They weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to protect something bigger than themselves. On the other side, the rebellion's forces were disorganized. The generals who had once sworn loyalty to Zara were no longer united in purpose. They were fighting not for a cause, but for pride, for power. Their troops, divided in their loyalty, lacked the same resolve. The clash of steel and weapons rang through the air as the two sides fought. Max was in the thick of the battle, fighting alongside Zara's forces, his every move calculated and precise. He knew the rebellion was desperate, but he also knew that this was the final test. If Zara's vision was to become a reality, if the empire was to be saved, they had to win. Amid the chaos, Zara remained calm. Her every move was deliberate. She wasn't just commanding her troops, she was leading them, showing them that their fight was not one of mere survival, but of hope. Every soldier who followed her felt the change within themselves. They weren't just fighting for the empire. They were fighting for a future where peace could exist. Max fought his way through the battlefield, knowing that the moment to end it all was coming. He had trained Zara well, but there was one final thing she needed to do to truly solidify her leadership. She needed to show her people that she was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for their future. As the battle raged on, Zara made her move. She pushed forward, breaking through the enemy lines and heading straight for the heart of the rebellion's forces. Max followed closely behind, knowing that this was the moment that would decide everything. The rebellion's leader, General Vorn, stood in the center of the battlefield, rallying his troops. His eyes locked onto Zara as she advanced toward him, her every step echoing with the weight of her decision. This was it. This was the confrontation that would determine the fate of the empire. Zara stopped just a few feet away from General Vorn, her voice loud and clear as she addressed him. "This ends now, Vorn. You've lost. Your rebellion is over." Vorn sneered. "You think you've won. Zara, you're just a puppet, controlled by the human. You've lost your empire, your people." Zara stood tall, her eyes burning with the fire of determination. "I've gained something far greater than an empire. Vorn, I've gained the loyalty and trust of my people. They no longer follow me out of fear. They follow me because they believe in what we can become." With those words, Zara stepped forward, and with a swift motion, disarmed Vorn. The rebellion's forces froze as they witnessed their leader's defeat. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Max approached Zara, his expression filled with pride. "You did it, Zara. You showed them the truth. This is your victory." Zara turned to him, her eyes softening. "No, Max. This isn't just my victory. It's the victory of everyone who believes in a better future. A future where we can all live in peace. The remaining rebels, seeing their leader defeated, began to surrender. One by one, they laid down their weapons, realizing that the fight was over. Zara's empire had not fallen, it had been transformed. What had once been a ruthless regime had been replaced by a new era, one where compassion and unity ruled. As the dust settled and the last of the fighting ceased, Zara and Max stood side by side, looking out over the battlefield. They had won, not just a battle, but a war for the soul of the empire. They had proven that leadership wasn't about fear or control. It was about strength in unity, in understanding, and in the courage to change. Zara turned to Max, a smile breaking across her face. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Max smiled back, his heart filled with hope for the future. "Yes, Zara. This is only the beginning. A new era has begun." And with that, the galaxy moved forward, ready for a new chapter, one where peace, unity, and the strength of the human spirit could shape the future for. Zara stood tall, her eyes burning with the fire of determination. "I've gained something far greater than an empire, Vorn. I've gained the loyalty and trust of my people. They no longer follow me out of fear. They follow me because they believe in what we can become." With those words, Zara stepped forward, and with a swift motion, disarmed Vorn. The rebellion's forces froze as they witnessed their leader's defeat. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Max approached Zara, his expression filled with pride. "You did it, Zara. You showed them the truth. This is your victory." Zara turned to him, her eyes softening. "No, Max, this isn't just my victory. It's the victory of everyone who believes in a better future, a future where we can all live in peace." The remaining rebels, seeing their leader defeated, began to surrender. One by one, they laid down their weapons, realizing that the fight was over. Zara's empire had not fallen, it had been transformed. What had once been a ruthless regime had been replaced by a new era, one where compassion and unity ruled. As the dust settled and the last of the fighting ceased, Zara and Max stood side by side, looking out over the battlefield. They had won, not just a battle, but a war for the soul of the empire. They had proven that leadership wasn't about fear or control. It was about strength in unity, in understanding, and in the courage to change. Zara turned to Max, a smile breaking across her face. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Max smiled back, his heart filled with hope for the future. "Yes, Zara. This is only the beginning. A new era has begun." And with that, the galaxy moved forward, ready for a new chapter, one where peace, unity, and the strength of the human spirit could shape the future